Alright guys, this is going to be my review on Final Fantasy VII like I promised. Sorry it took a little longer. I just wanted to do some more reading up on it before I actually talked about it. Okay, so to start off, we'll start with background. Final Fantasy VII in many ways was a very, very big deal. And the reasons why it was such a big deal was because it was the first Final Fantasy game in the series to not be on a Nintendo platform. Up until Final Fantasy VI, Final Fantasy was always on a Nintendo platform, the Super Nintendo. Now, me personally, because I'm not as old as some other people are, I didn't get to play Final Fantasy until Final Fantasy VII on the PlayStation. It was my first RPG, my first Final Fantasy game. I know I didn't have a Super Nintendo growing up. I had a Genesis, but what it did do was after I played Seven and they started releasing, Origins, which is Final Fantasy 1, 2, Chronicles, which was 4, and I believe Chrono Trigger, and Anthology, which was 5 and 6. It wasn't until they were released on the PlayStation until I was able to play them, and that's when I really got hooked. Now, the reason why it was such a big deal was the first reason was because it was the first Final Fantasy game to be on the PlayStation format. Like I said, up until that point, Final Fantasy was always on a Nintendo platform. But because this game was going to be so drastically different, it was fully 3D. It was a much larger game than the others. It was originally supposed to be slated to be released on Nintendo 64. But during the process of developing it, they found out, well, a cartridge isn't really going to do this game any justice because of how massive and how, advanced it was. They took a chance to go and went to the PlayStation 1, which was still, at the time 1997, was still relatively new, the PlayStation. And especially towards the CDs, which they can hold more than a cartridge can. A lot of people back then were crying foul because they thought it was blasphemy because they were switching to a completely different, platform to play on. And I think, personally speaking, and a lot of people say this was probably the best thing that they could have done because Final Fantasy really didn't explode with popularity until 7 came out for a lot of reasons. There was a lot of new players like me who were getting into it, especially because of how the game was, how big it was, and how it looked. Also, this was the first Final Fantasy to have the most comprehensive marketing campaign. There was a lot of ads taken out for it. A lot of money was spent in doing commercials and ads and this and that. And this was to promote the game because it was going to be that big, which it was very, very successful. This was really the game that made Squaresoft the powerhouse in gaming because of how it exploded with popularity. Um, Now, Final Fantasy VII was also different in a lot of ways because obviously the character models were a lot different. You had the full motion videos, you had the 3D rendered backgrounds. The problem was, especially today with 7, is that 7 did not age well at all. It really didn't in terms of graphics, especially translation. Now, because everybody who's played it know what the graphics are. The character models are very blocky. The arms are sort of disproportionate, and the characters really didn't have a mouth or nose or whatever like that. But one of the big problems was the translation. For those of you who played the original versions, there's a lot of translation errors, and the most famous one was probably when Aerith says, "This guy are sick." Obviously because supposedly this guy is sick. And actually, another good example of this translation error was in the beginning of the game. For those of you who played, where you're going up to the Shinra headquarters for the first time, and you got to climb all that wreckage to get up there, and you have that swinging, pipe that you have to jump to, and then the directions say you got to jump on the pipe before the pipe gets too close. And that was and if you actually did it that way, it was very hard to actually jump on. That was actually a translation error. What you're supposed to say is you have to jump on the pipe when it gets as close as it's going to get so you can get on. This was an example of the translation errors. And I know that recently they had a release of this for the Steam, which they updated some of the graphics and they fixed the translation errors. Now this was also the one Final Fantasy that has been that a lot of people have gotten on behind for a remake. a lot of people have been clamoring for a remake for many, many years. An example of this was when the PlayStation 3 was first being released, and they sort of did like a tech demo with Final Fantasy VII, updated graphics and how great it looks. So this sort of gave a lot of people the impression that, oh, they're gonna remake the game for the PlayStation 3. And Square, like the assholes that they are, was basically just dangling a carrot in front of everybody, and then basically come out and say, "Oh, we're not remaking it." This pissed off a lot of people because because okay, some of the games in the series have gotten remakes is obviously 1 and 2 for the PSP. You had 4, which has been ported and remade to death. Oh my god! I remember a meme online showing every version and port of Final Fantasy IV, and it's like a cat's paw in someone's hand, and it says it's time to stop remaking 4. And we also got the remaster recently for Final Fantasy X and X 2. But this is the game that I think, besides the other ones like 6, 5, 7, 8 and 9, that have been demanding a remake, which Square will not answer anything to. They've given hints about doing it, but then they retract it, giving stipulations like, oh, our new games have to sell as much as 7 if you want to remake it. It's just a lot of bullshit, a lot of bad PR on Square's part. Okay, so first let's go into gameplay, because the gameplay mechanic was actually very good for this game. You still had like another Final Fantasies, you could equip your weapons, you can equip some armor and an accessory. You don't get the arms and the legs and the body all like that in the other games. And but the weapons in this game and some of the other armor were also exclusive to certain characters. For example, only Cloud could use swords, while Tifa has the gloves and Cid has the lances and the spears and stuff. Like, they had their own exclusive weapons, but especially for armor, some armor was also excluded to sex. Like, there was like the Minerva band or whatever that was only for females, and the Zedric, which was just for males. But it also brought up especially the thing with materia. Materia in this game was involved in the plot a lot, and especially in the gameplay, are like these little rocks that hold different powers. Like, you have materia that's for black magic, you have materia for white magic, you have materia for summoning, you have materia for buffing up your characters and stats. You had, things like added effect and elemental materia. And the reason why this system was so good was because of the thousands of possibilities and combinations of materia. For example, I'll give you a good example. One of the combinations I personally like to use is when later in the game, when you can master the Hades materia. If you go Hades with added effect, and you have like slash roll, meaning that you could attack all enemies in one gathering, but at the same time, they're going to be hit with, if it's successful, they're going to be hit with almost every status ailment in the book, which basically makes plowing through enemies very, very easily. This was actually a very good system because you could basically design it the way you want. You can do materia combinations to whatever you want to do. Now, one thing about 7 that has been done in previous games is that characters, well, some of them had sort of, they didn't outright say it about quests. The quests weren't really in this game. It was implied, but it wasn't. They didn't straight out say about classes. For example, obviously Cid is a dragoon, where Tifa is a monk, and where Aeris can either be a white mage / a summoner. It's there. It's obvious that's what they're trying to apply for, but they don't outright say it, like in written dialogue and stuff. Now also, it was still turn based, and you had 3 characters to a party. But this was only only at the time they had limit breaks. That you had desperation moves in 6, but 7's limit break system was probably the best out of the series, because it's basically like you take damage, your limit bar raises up, and when it gets to full, you could do a limit break. But the good thing about this is that you could save it for later fights. If you don't want to use a limit break right now and use it on the boss, you could. This was very good. Like other Final Fantasy, like 8 and 9, did their own version of limit breaks, but I think that those were kind of flawed and they weren't drawn out to the full potential. It wasn't a lot of it wasn't executed like it was in 7, which in 7 was very good. Okay, so let's go into story because story is gonna take a little bit of time. Basically, the whole plot of the story revolves sort of around these people called ancients. Ancient Ancients were these sort of cosmic people that sort of travel from planet to planet looking for a home. Now, sometimes they'll land on a planet to sort of recuperate, and then they'll leave that planet to go find another home. Or either sometimes if they're too tired, they'll settle that planet. This is which was happening in 7. In 7's world was Gaia, like in like in Final Fantasy 9. Okay, and basically as these people known as ancients were living and thriving on Gaia, another space oddity sort of came out of the sky named Jenova. Now, Jenova was obviously an evil being that has the power to shapeshift and control people's minds. So when Jenova crashed into the planet causing the Great Crater on Gaia in 7, Jenova disguised herself as an ancient, as a peaceful person that to infiltrate the ancients. And what happened was Jenova gave the ancients a specific disease which killed most of them off, only except a choice few, which did turn out to be Aeris's ancestors, right? Because she was the only ancient left alive. So basically, the Shinra company, which was an electrical company, was set up, and it became into this global conglomerate, which had its own military, which basically controlled the world. And they used, what was it, Mako energy, which is the planet's life energy, to help make this power, and especially for materia. So before the game started, they started doing experiments on people. Because Mako, in a lot of ways, since it was life energy, it was also sort of like radiation. They took their soldiers first class, which was Shinra's elite fighters, showered them in Mako to try to make them more powerful, which worked to a degree. Except with scientists like Professor Gas, were sort of doing studies on Jenova and the Ancients until Hojo came around, which Hojo was primarily the reason why all the events in 7 happened was because of him. Was a mad scientist. He wanted to, create monsters for the sake of just because he could do it. So what happened was he impregnated Vincent's love interest, Lucretia, with his son, which was Sephiroth, spoiler alert, and injected the fetus when Sephiroth was still in the womb with Jenova cells. Now, what Jenova cells do, if someone is injected with Jenova cells, Jenova cells can control your mind and create memories, which is why throughout the game, Sephiroth refers to Jenova as his mother, because these are the cells inside of him sort of controlling his mind, thinking that Jenova is his mother, when in fact she really isn't. So what ends up happening is that, let's see, you have the big event that happens in Nibelheim. You have Zack and Sephiroth and some other Shinra soldiers who go to investigate a faulty Mako reactor in Nibelheim. They get there, they're finding out about the human experiment, trying to turn them into monsters. And this is where Sephiroth sort of loses his mind. He goes off saying that he was a clone and that he was the son of Jenova, and he basically loses his mind, killing basically everybody in Nibelheim, seriously injuring, Zack. But what sort of built up to this is you have the main character for this main protagonist is Cloud, who in the beginning is who says that he was the one, who goes to Nibelheim with Sephiroth. He's in Soldier First Class, and he talks about how Sephiroth lost his mind, he destroyed the town, and how he sort of squared off against Sephiroth, but he can't remember anything after that. And the whole game plot, for the plot, you're basically going through as Cloud, who's struggling to remember about who he really is. He's having trouble remembering a lot of things about his life. Sephiroth then starts sort of toying with him, saying that he's a Sephiroth clone as well. He's a puppet, this and that. Well, spoiler alert, what really happens is that, and a lot of people don't like Cloud for the same reason they don't like Squall. Cloud is schizophrenic, he's nuts, he's not a good protagonist, but what really happens is Cloud was, when he grew up in Nibelheim with Tifa, he was sort of like the type of kid who really didn't believe in himself. He didn't really have any friends. He wanted to fit in, but he couldn't. He was by himself. He had a crush on Tifa, and he wanted Tifa to sort of recognize him as being a strong person. Okay? So he has this idea, well, if I go and join Soldier and I get first class, people are going to start seeing me as being strong. They're not going to see me as weak anymore. What ends up happening is that he tries to go into the Soldier and he doesn't make it, so he becomes a regular Shinra soldier. Now, what ends up happening is that it wasn't the soldier first class that went with them to Nibelheim wasn't really Cloud, it was Zack. Zack was a good friend of Cloud, and Cloud was one of the regular Shinra soldiers who was actually there for the whole thing that happened. And the reason why he thinks that he was Zack was because what really happens is that Zack squares off with Sephiroth. He gets his ass kicked. And during this time, Sephiroth kills Tifa's dad, and he seriously injures Tifa. Meanwhile, after he kicks Zack's ass, Cloud sort of runs in his Shinra uniform, grabs Zack's sword, and stabs Sephiroth. So, as Sephiroth is leaving the reactor, Cloud goes after him again, but he stabs Cloud with his sword. So Cloud somehow summons the strength to lift up Sephiroth and throw him into basically the life stream, which is the last time we actually see the actual version of Sephiroth. And since Zack and Cloud are seriously wounded, Hojo finds them and starts putting them through experiments. He starts showering them with Mako, but not only that, but injecting them with Genova cells. Now, if someone has, for example, Zack, someone who has a strong will and a strong mind, the Genova cells won't have any effect on you, which happens to Zack. But because of Cloud being, so down on himself and as weak as he was, he's greatly affected by Genova cells. It sort of wipes out his memory. So, the two of them end up escaping, Zack and Cloud, and on their way back to go to Midgar, Zack basically tells him his life story, tells him how he sort of got into Soldier and this and that, and Cloud, being his mind was broken as it is, interpreted Zack's story as his own, because Zack is obviously telling him this when he's in this vegetative, catatonic state. So Cloud sort of interprets his story as it's Cloud's story. Sad thing is, on the way to Midgard, they get ambushed by Shinra, and they end up killing Zack, which you don't actually get to see during the game and the plot until you actually go to the Shinra Mansion, which is actually an optional side quest if you wanted to get Vincent. So throughout the game, Cloud is sort of struggling with himself about who he really is, and that the story that he's given to everybody is basically Zack's story. Now, it's not found out until much later on, after Cloud gives Sephiroth the black materia, when when Tifa and him fall into the life stream, and I really like this part. They fall into the life stream, and basically the next part of the story is that you're actually in Cloud's mind, and that you're trying to help him sort of get it together, to put himself back together, because obviously his mind is broken. After falling into the live stream, you have to give him the black materia to Sephiroth. Now, the funny thing about this is that the true Sephiroth fell in the live stream when Cloud threw him in. So, throughout the first well, the majority of the first half of the game, you're following quote-unquote Sephiroth, but who you're really following is Jenova, because every time you counter this Sephiroth, you're fighting a part of Jenova. Because, like I said before, Jenova can shapeshift and take the form of anything it wants, and it takes the form of Sephiroth. And basically, you think you're chasing Sephiroth, but you're chasing Jenova, because the real Sephiroth is sort of crystallized in the live stream, as we see much later on. Now, you also have, with this game, a lot of subplots. You have the one with Barret, where he lives in Coral, the mining town, Dyne, which is his best friend, how everybody's sort of going for Mako energy instead of mining, they make more money, and it sort of ends up that there's an accident that happens at this reactor in Coral, so Shinra attacks Barret's town of Coral, destroys it. You know, this is when him and Dyne sort of get hurt in their arms, where they have to fuse the guns to their arms. And it's not until a little bit later on, when you're actually in Coral Prison, you have this showdown with Dyne, who's kind of broken. He's sort of suicidal. You beat him, and he ends up killing himself. Because he finally realized because he comes to the realization, I've killed too much, and I can't be around my daughter Marlene, which is sort of Barrett's adopted daughter. His hands are too stained to carry her, so he ends up killing himself. And you also have the subplot of Vincent, who was in love with Lucretia, who Lucretia goes with Hojo and gets pregnant by Hojo, and who becomes sort of depressed because he couldn't stop her, and he sort of locks himself into a coffin in this Shinra mansion as a punishment. You also have, Tifa, who's part of the whole Cloud storyline. But you also have Aris. Aris was a huge character because she was only surviving Ancient, and she was also the girlfriend of Zack. So when Cloud's sort of telling her the story, she already knows that it's really Zack's story. So she sort of knows already, even in the beginning of the game, that, he thinks he's Zack, basically, because Cloud is broken. There was a huge romantic emphasis in this game. You had the romance between, because you either as Cloud, you have you can either be in love with Tifa, which is his true love in reality, or Aris, because he thinks he's Zack. You have the dating mechanic, which is basically whoever you show affection to, or how you do certain things you go on a date with in the Gold Saucer. And I think the possibilities are Tifa, Aris, Yuffie, and I think Barret. We have Barret. I think those are the possibilities, and you have to do with certain mechanics to sort of get it to go one way or another, which can either be serious or you can make it just funny. So Aris, being the last remaining Ancient, what happens is that throughout the story, it's sort of hinted that she could be the only one who could stop Sephiroth and Jenova, because what happened is the way the game sort of goes about this is that it is also held probably the saddest moment in video gaming history, I guess, amongst the masses, and probably the most shocking is the death of Aris. In the city of the ancients, Sephiroth or Jenova comes down, skewers her, and kills her, because in a lot of ways, when you play this for the first time, you weren't expecting to see this. And when I first played, I was actually very shocked, like a lot of other people, and saddened, because of how sudden, how unexpected it was. And the interesting thing about this was that it was actually done by Sakaguchi, because during the development of 7, Sakaguchi's mom died. And so this was sort of his way of sort of having his questions about life and death and the idea of the spirit come into play. That's why he had that death scene and how tragic it was. So what ends up happening is that since Cloud is being controlled by Jenova, and 2 different times he gives Sephiroth the Jenova the black materia, which summons Meteor. And the reason why Jenova or Sephiroth wanted to summon Meteor was to cause the planet Because what happens if the planet is injured, okay, the planet will heal itself with the spirit in it, with its life, the life stream, its life energy. And with what Sephiroth slash Nova wanted to do was cause a wound this big so that all the life energy um, comes down into one area. And now, how Sephiroth slash Genova wanted to be in this energy to sort of become a god. Sort of like Kefka did. Sephiroth was probably, besides Kefka, one of the most famous, not only Final Fantasy villains, but video game villains of all time. Those two were probably the best and the most drawn out experience examples of villains. Now, throughout like the later half of the game, it's basically them either the party battling either the Shinra or Sephiroth, which brings into play about Squall. Not Squall. What the hell am I saying? I mean Sid. I apologize. I'm a little today. Sid was also an important character because obviously for his line, "Sit down and drink your goddamn tea." He wanted to go into space, Sid, but because his sort of common law wife, I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to remember her name. Please forgive me for that. I can't remember right now. But his common law wife was the reason why, like, he was about to go into space, but because she was still in the engine room, and now she was doing repairs, he was about to. The space shuttle was about to take off, but if it did, she would end up getting killed. So he stopped the mission and the launch, and because of that, they never ever went into space again. Which she sort of, because he sort of verbally abuses her, and she sort of accepts it at that because of what happened, which is also very sad. So what happens, and I'm sorry for breaking it up this way, what happens towards, the end of the game, at the end of the game, is after you obviously defeat Sephiroth. I mean, what happens towards the end is you beat Sephiroth, and then in the mind of Cloud, you fight Sephiroth again, and you defeat him to finally break his hold over Cloud, because the majority of the game, Cloud is being manipulated and controlled by Sephiroth and Genova. Meteor's coming down upon Midgar, and it's causing all types of mayhem and destruction. And Holy is released, which is another force used by the ancients that throughout the game was supposed to be insinuated that Holy could stop Meteor and evil and whatever. But when Holy doesn't work, it doesn't have the effect that it was supposed to. The life stream sort of comes out of the Earth and intercepts Meteor and stops Meteor from obviously hitting the planet. Now, towards the end of the game, or at the end of the game, and especially in the beginning, you see Aeris praying in Midgard in the slums, and it looks like there's a little sort of Mako fountain that's going off a little bit, and she's praying. And what happens is, in this game, if an ancient prays to the planet and the planet hears the prayer, that the prayer is going to come true. So basically, this was the game's way of Aeris is praying that the planet's going to be saved because of what's going to be happening. And towards the end, this was the planet's way of answering that prayer by stopping Meteor. So that's so in a lot of ways, that's sort of the plot in a nutshell. I'm sorry I didn't go over it much more detail, because we could sit here all day and talk about the plot, but and it was sort of by a lot of people because of a plot like this, because how diverse and complex it was and complicated, it drew two types of people: the fanboys, and everybody knows what the fanboys are like. These are the people who hold this game until like it's the holy grail of video games, who will sit there and say that this is the greatest game ever made. Anything else compared to it sucks, which really isn't true. This is the extreme. And then also drew out the people who were calling the plot in the game an overhyped, overly dramatic, melodramatic piece of shit. I mean, me, I love the game personally. I always will. You know, I'm not gonna be one of these. I don't think it's the greatest thing of all time because well, at least for video games, there's too many games that are gonna be up there for a greatest of all time, and there's so many to choose from. You really can't pick one. Um, this is when fanboyism really exploded, and it became sort of a problem, especially with RPGs and Final Fantasy, was because of this game. Um, I'm sort of in the middle. I love the game. I don't think it's the greatest thing of all time. It's still a lot of fun to play through, and it's awesome to experience. But also the people who, because there's also the people who go on the forums, the articles, the YouTube videos, who will just sit there and say it's a piece of shit. It sucks. Anybody who likes it sucks, and it's a fanboy. Because there's two different types of fanboys. There's the fanboys who love the game, holds it like the holy grail, and then there's the people who purposely troll, go on videos, articles, forums, boards, who just down the game and anybody who likes it just for the fun of it. Which sort of begs the question is that if you don't like the game, why are you going on videos about it, and why are you going on boards and all this just to say it sucks? You're going out of your way to say the game sucks, which makes you into a troll, a sort of anti-fanboy, sort of extreme. So let's talk about, since I talked about the majority of the plot, let's go and talk about side quests. Now, there were side quests in this game, like you had the ancient forest, you had the weapons. Ugh. Now, when it comes to super bosses, this game had probably the hardest super bosses of the series. You had Ruby Weapon, and then you had Emerald Weapon. Emerald Weapon was a pain in the ass to defeat, especially the first few times you played the game because of how hard he is. The reason why he's good to beat is because you get the master materia of every kind from him, which is very useful. But Ruby Weapon is not only cheap, but to be honest, there's no really any way, there's no point of really fighting him, because if you actually fight, because one of the easiest ways to defeat him is using the W summon with Hades to paralyze him, and then Knights of the Round over and over again to beat him. And the reason why he's not really worth the fight is because when you went from him is Desert Rose. Then when you go to the Calm Traveler, you trade Desert Rose for basically a gold chocobo. Which, by that time, you probably already have one, which sort of makes it just kind of pointless. Chocobo breeding in this game was very big because there's certain parts in the overworld where they have caves for legendary material, like the Knights of the Round, and, the other types of materia, the Mega Materia. And basically you have to race chocobos to raise their levels up, give them the greens to up their stats, and mate them with certain nuts and certain types of chocobos to create different colors. You had green, you had blue, you had I think was the black chocobo, and then you had the gold. Now, I wasn't the biggest fan of the chocobo breeding because in reality, the chocobo breeding was very tedious and very long to do. The rewards, yes, are very good for it. The rewards for doing it were very good, and they were very worthwhile, but the whole process was just, I found it very tedious. I found that sort of Chocobo Hot and Cold was a little more, at times that was tedious, but it was more fun to do that than just, racing them, breeding them, it really was my cup of tea, but I always did it just because I wanted the material that goes with it. You also have the optional characters. You had Vincent was an optional character, and Yuffie was an optional character. For example, if you want to go through the game and not get those characters, you can. You don't have to get those characters. The side mission with Yuffie is going to Wutai, the whole she steals all your materia thing. You don't have to do those things if you don't want to. It's completely optional. I always did because I always found Yuffie and Vincent to be very useful characters and very good characters to use. Which brings me to the next point, and that's the whole master materia thing. Throughout the, later on in the plot, you have to try to get the huge materia for, from Shinra so that they can't use it. So if you master all of a certain type of materia, for example, if you master all the magic materia, you get a master materia for that magic, which is one piece of materia which holds all the spells. And this is the same thing for command materia, for summon materia. it was very useful because you can, if you have the time and you have the patience, you can sit there and get mass material for every single character of your party. I personally never did that. I know people who have done that, which takes many, many, many hours to do. But you could basically become an unstoppable team by doing that. You also had the ultimate weapon side quest for that, where you get the ultimate weapons for each character. You had the Sunken Galenka, which is, you go in there, it has a very strong enemies. Trying to think. You had the Gold Saucer, which had all the mini games, the battle arena, the all little arcade games, which you get prizes from that too. I'm trying to think about other ones. There's the Bone Village one, where you could dig up, like, rare items if you know where to dig and how to do that. So let's go in to talk about presentation. Now, the presentation of the game for 1997 was very, very good. It was the first, like I said, 3D Final Fantasy. Well, like I said before, the game didn't age well with graphics. I mean, today, 2014, 17 years later, it didn't age well. But one of the things that it did have, at least for me, it had a great soundtrack. Uematsu did an awesome job like he did in the other games. The soundtrack for this was very, very good. One of his best, one of my favorites. Let's see. Now the spin-offs. Now, this was one of the only games. Only other Final Fantasy games that had spin-offs. Now, 4 obviously had spin-offs and a sequel to. 10 did, 12 did. Now the spin-offs of this game, I didn't get a chance. I didn't play all of them. You have Crisis Core, which has to do with Zack's story. You had Before Crisis, which really talks about the real Avalanche, the real terrorist Avalanche group. And let's see, you also had Dirge of Cerberus, which was about Vincent, and it was like a shooter version of 7. I never played. I wasn't really interested in that. I never played Before Crisis. And then you also had the movie of Advent Children. Now, Crisis Core was actually very good. I like Crisis Core a lot. Some people don't because of the different battle styles, and it's not as open world as Final Fantasy VII was, but it still was very good, and it goes into a lot of backstory about Sephiroth and everything that went into Shinra. If they were gonna, I don't know if it's ever gonna happen, with a remake. This has been going on forever. People have been waiting, almost forever for a remake. Now, if I was personally gonna make a remake for 7, what I would do is that I would include all the other spin-off games into the one package. Like, you have one package that has they had the remake of 7, but not only that, you have Crisis Core, you have Before Crisis, you have Dirge of Cerberus, you have Advent Children. If they were going to do a remake and they included all that into one package for one price, I think it would be worth even if they wanted to charge $60 for it. You're still getting a lot of content for the price. Ford did something similar. They had the original game, they had the interlude, and then they had the After Years, which was their sequel, and there was a lot of content in that game, and it was actually done very, very well. They updated the graphics, and to get through everything in that took a very long time. It took about over 100 hours to do everything. And actually, 7 actually holds a very, very interesting sort of theory. Like I talked about the other theories. I talked about the Renoa is Ultimecia theory in 8. There was a theory that 7 and 10 are actually connected. Now, a lot of people have sort of, brushed away this theory that, it's not possible, but it actually is very interesting. So, the theory for this is that when you play 10-2, there's a kid in there that's part of the protagonist called Shinra. He's a little kid who wears a little face mask, who is very technologically sound. And the theory goes that since all the Final Fantasy games, each individual game sort of happens in the same universe, actually I could see this as being possible. The theory is that in 10, after 10-2 happened, if you get the good ending, Shinra, the kid, and some other people sort of invent space travel in the world of 10. And they travel, and they land on the world of Gaia, Seven's Gaia. And when they land on the world of Seven's Gaia, they started the Shinra Electric Power Company, which, people will brush this off as not being possible, but I think it's actually very plausible because, when you really think about it, it is possible because if they infected space travel and they went to another planet, they found Gaia, and they settled and they created the Shinra Electric Power Company, it is very possible, and I think that is a very good, theory. The only theory I don't really buy about in the Final Fantasy series is the Squall is dead theory, which I explained before. But I think that's a very interesting theory because it does make a lot of sense when you think about it, because when you're in 7, space travel isn't something that's new. It's not like, oh, we're going to the space the very first time in a shuttle. When you get to Rocket Town in 7, it sounds like because they have a space program, Shinra, that they've gone into space multiple times, which sort of backs up the theory a little bit, which is very interesting. Trying to think what else can I cover. Well, I can't really think of anything else. If I left anything out, guys, I apologize. Especially with this game, there's so much that goes into it, and there's so much involved in it. I really hope one day they can wake up and do a remake of 7. See, my theory is this about why Square hasn't done it. Square, like Capcom, has had a lot of financial problems in the last few years, and Square is not a company that's protected indefinitely about being bankrupt. They can go into bankruptcy if they continue to screw up. I think that we might see a remake of 7 if Square is in such dire need for money and they could possibly go out of business soon, if they can make one game and then go out of business like it almost happened with the first Final Fantasy, I believe that if it comes to that, they'll take all their money and remake a 7 because they know, despite their fuck-ups and everything else, they know that a lot of people will go out and buy the shit of a Final Fantasy VII Remake, especially if you put it on multiple platforms. I think that if they come close to going bankrupt ever, that they will remake 7 because they know that will save them from going out of business because of how much money it would bring in. And this for them could be an ace in the hole, which is very smart to do, which is probably why we haven't seen it happen yet. If it ever did happen, I wouldn't be shocked because that's almost like think about like 7 Final Attack, Phoenix. When you die, you have one last attack and it's Phoenix and it raises your party back to max. That's what I think it will be like, and if that ever happened, that would be pretty cool, in my opinion. I don't think there's anything else I could talk about with 7. I'm trying to decide which game I'm gonna do next. Review probably 4. And I'll probably be doing Final Fantasy 4 as a review next. I might do some other discussions in the upcoming week. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'll see you guys next time.